Episode 3: The Loneliness of a Broken System. That's the sound of modern loneliness, not silence. It's the sound of being connected to everyone, everywhere, all at once, and still feeling completely alone. Think about the last time you sat in a diner and watched people. 10 years ago, you'd see conversations, couples talking, friends laughing. Now, heads down, thumbs moving, everyone scrolling. Everyone in the same room, alone, together. We tell ourselves this is just how things are now. Technology, the times. But what if it's not natural? What if the way we feel, disconnected, anxious, lonely, isn't a personal failure? What if it's the direct result of decisions about where money flows and where it doesn't? Last week in episode 2, we followed the money. $5 billion every year leaving Indiana, going to utility shareholders in North Carolina, to grain processors in Chicago, to hospital corporations in St. Louis, to bank executives on Wall Street. We named this the Crossroads Trap, a state so optimized for the pass-through of things that it began to pass through on its own people. But here's the question that kept me up. What does $5 billion look like when it leaves a state? What is the physical residue of extraction? This is no longer a number on a spreadsheet. It's a storefront with a for lease sign that's been there for 5 years. It's a library now open only 3 days a week. It's a diner that closed because the regulars couldn't afford to eat out anymore. It's the emptiness you feel driving through a town that used to be something and is now just a place you pass through. I felt it myself during those thousands of conversations. I would drive into a town I remembered from my childhood, park on Main Street, and just sit. Some of those main streets still had life, coffee shops with people inside, kids on bikes, but others, I'd sit for 20 minutes and see maybe 2 people, both walking fast, heads down, no lingering, no stopping to talk, no eye contact. And then I would pull out my phone, because that's what you do when you're alone in public, and I'd scroll, and I'd think, this is it, connected to everyone, alone with no one. That feeling has a name. Sociologists call it the collapse of third places. Part 2: 3 Levels of Disconnection. Let us diagnose what we've lost. The loneliness we feel isn't one thing. It's 3 things stacked like sediment. Civic, familial, psychological. Each reinforces the one below it. Level 1 is the civic level, or the vanishing of third places. The first place is your home, second place is where you work, and a third place is basically everything else. The diner where the waitress knows your order, the barber shop where guys argue about the Colts or the Pacers, the library where kids do homework, the union hall where workers gather after shift. Third places are where community happens, not in formal meetings, but in the casual, unplanned moments that build trust over time. And they're disappearing. Since 1990, Indiana has lost 60% of its independent retail stores, 30% of its rural library hours, 25% of its community centers, 50% of its active union halls, and 60% of its fraternal organization memberships. The Elks, the Moose, the VFW, they're all hollowing out. These numbers aren't just statistics. These are where farmers and teachers and factory workers sat at the same counter and realized that they had more in common than not. When those places vanish, something else vanishes with them: the habit of showing up. Voter turnout in local elections has dropped from 45% in the 1970s to below 20% today. Volunteer firefighter ranks are down 30%. School board meetings that used to draw a crowd now draw 5 people. That is what extraction looks like when you're not just looking at a spreadsheet. It looks like a town that forgot how to be a town. Level 2 is the familial level, where threads have been severed. This level is closer to home. Remember the secession crisis from episode 1? The farmer with no one to pass land to, the tradesman whose kids moved away, the teacher who trained generations just to watch them all leave. These are all conversations that used to happen and simply don't anymore. Think about what gets passed down in families. Not just land or money, stories, skills, the knowledge of how to fix a tractor, how to can tomatoes, how to navigate a town's unwritten rules. When the young leave and do not come back, that knowledge dies. A farm being sold to a corporation is not just a business transaction. That is a lineage closing. And it's lonely on both sides. The parent who built something no one wants to inherit, the child who left and now feels like a visitor every time they come home. Two kinds of loneliness facing each other across a table that used to be full. Level 3 is the psychological level. This is where we marketize ourselves. The third level is the deepest. When community structures atrophy, we're forced back into ourselves. We become individual consumers of solutions that used to be collective. Friendship becomes a networking strategy where you don't just hang out, you make connections. Leisure becomes a curated product. You no longer play catch in the backyard, you book a family experience. Even our inner lives get marketized. Therapy apps, meditation subscriptions, wellness products, all promising to fix what used to be fixed by a conversation with a neighbor. We're taught to see ourselves as isolated economic units, competing for scarce resources. Your coworker is not an ally, he's competition. The new family on the block isn't potential friends. They're competition for school resources, for status, for belonging. This mindset breeds distrust, and distrust is the fertilizer of loneliness. When you don't trust people, you don't reach out. When you don't reach out, you're alone. And when you're alone, you're easier to extract from. Introducing the spirit level. This is where this episode's book comes in. The Spirit Level by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett. Honestly, this is one of the most important books I've ever read. Its thesis is devastating. More unequal societies don't just have more poverty at the bottom, they have worse outcomes for everyone, rich and poor alike. Worse health, worse mental health, worse education, more violence, and less trust. Why do Americans mistrust their fellow citizens more than the Japanese do? Why do we have higher rates of teenage pregnancy than the French? Why do we have more homicides than the Spanish, Australians, and Danes put together? The answer may be this simple. We have more inequality. This groundbreaking book, based on years of research, provides hard evidence to show how almost every measure of well-being, from life expectancy to mental illness, violence to illiteracy, is affected less by how wealthy a society is than by how unequal it is. why societies with a bigger gap between rich and poor are worse for everyone in them, including the well-off, how we can find positive solutions and move toward a happier, fairer future. It might sound counterintuitive, but inequality is not just a problem for the poor. It poisons the entire society. It makes us all more anxious, more isolated, more alone. And Indiana? We're one of the most unequal states in the entire country. The gap between rich and poor here has grown 25% since 1990. We have the 13th highest incarceration rate, the 33rd highest infant mortality rate, and the 43rd lowest life expectancy. We are, by every measure, a lonely and unequal place. And the spirit level says that those two things, loneliness and inequality, are actually the same thing. Part 3. How extraction builds isolation. So we've named the 3 levels, but naming is not enough. We need to understand the engine that produces them, because this didn't happen by accident. It was built deliberately over decades. The first part of the engine is logistics over community. Remember the crossroads trap? A state optimized for the pass-through of things. Here's what that looks like on the ground. We invest in wider highway lanes for semi-trucks, not sidewalks for neighbors. We build massive warehouses at interstate exits for Amazon, not Main Street co-working spaces for local entrepreneurs. We fund mega projects to move corn and soybeans to Chicago faster, not bike paths that connect one town to the next. This built environment becomes hostile to spontaneous human connection. You can't walk anywhere. There's nowhere to sit. The only places to gather are private. Bars that require spending money, churches that require a specific belonging, coffee shops that expect you to buy something every hour. We literally paved over the places where community used to happen and replaced them with places designed to move product. Next is the time and stress poverty link. The second part of the engine is time, or rather, the lack of it. Stagnant wages plus rising costs equals a brutal math problem. To keep the lights on, people work more. Multiple jobs, longer hours, longer commutes because you can't afford to live near where you work. Did you know the average Hoosier commute has increased 20% since 1990? The average work week for working class families has increased by 10 hours. Time with friends and family has decreased by 30%. Exhaustion is the enemy of community. You can't organize a block party when you're working 60 hours across 2 jobs. You can't coach Little League when you're never home before dark. You can't build trust with neighbors when the only time that you see them is when you're both pulling out of your driveway at 6 a.m. This is by design. An exhausted population does not organize, doesn't ask questions, doesn't show up at city council meetings. It just survives. And surviving individuals are easier to extract from than thriving communities. The third part of this engine is the hardest to measure, but the most important to feel. A community needs something to build together, a project, a reason to show up beyond survival. Think about the generations before us. They built things together: schools, churches, town halls, volunteer fire departments, Little League fields. Not because someone paid them, because it was theirs. When was the last time your town built something together? Not something contracted out to a private company. Something that y'all did together with your own hands. That loss is devastating. Without a project, a community fragments into private anxieties. Your problem is your problem. Mine is mine. We do not have a common purpose. And sovereignty? That feels completely abstract, like something politicians argue about on TV, not something that you could possibly build with the people on your block. But here's the thing about shared projects. They don't have to be big to work. They just have to be real. Part 4, From Loneliness to Sovereignty. So here is where we are. 3 levels of disconnection, an engine that produces isolation, a population that feels alone, even when surrounded. It's easy to despair, to think, this is just how it is now. But here's what I learned in the Navy. When a system is broken, you don't just stare at it, you don't walk away, you fix it. First, let us reframe the problem. Loneliness is not some soft issue. It's a critical infrastructure failure. Think about it like water. If your pipes burst at home, you don't tell people to think positive thoughts about hydration. You fix the pipes. Social infrastructure carries trust to where it needs to go. Third places are the pipes. Community organizations are the pumps. Shared projects are the water. When the pipe breaks, when the diners close, when the libraries cut hours, the trust stops flowing. People get isolated, just like they would get thirsty. So the solution isn't to tell people to connect more, whatever that means. It's to rebuild the pipes. What we need is a shared project. So what does that look like? It means building things that give people a reason to be together, working on something that matters, creating spaces where people run into each other on purpose. It means giving people a shared project, something bigger than themselves, something that will outlast them, something worth passing on. Remember the secession crisis? That crisis isn't just about land or jobs. It's about meaning, the human need to build something that lasts beyond your own life, to know that what you did mattered. Right now, too many Hoosiers do not have that. They work jobs that don't feel like they're building anything. They live in towns that feel like they're shrinking. They look at their kids and think, what is there for them here? That's a systems failure, a failure to give people a project worth staying for. Introducing the Indiana Century Corps. So imagine a project so big, so visible, so undeniably real, that it gives people a reason to stay, a reason to work together, a reason to believe. That idea is called the Indiana Century Corps. Now, this is the first time I'm naming it on this podcast, so let me explain. The Indiana Century Corps is a sovereign workforce, modeled partially on the Civilian Conservation Corps of the 1930s, and partially on the discipline I learned in the nuclear Navy. It will build and operate the infrastructure Indiana needs for the next century. In case you're not familiar, the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC, was active from 1933 to 1942 as part of FDR's New Deal. It was a public work relief program that employed over 3 million young, unemployed men between the ages of 18 and 25 to restore natural resources. Enrollees received $30 a month, food, and housing, and they planted billions of trees and built infrastructure in national parks, such as roads and trails, which helped to alleviate Depression-era poverty. Here's how I imagine it working. A 12-week boot camp at Grissom Air Reserve Base, then specialized training, maybe Energy Corps at Purdue, Connectivity Corps at a new high-speed rail institute, agricultural core at Vincennes and various farms all across the state, and the resilience core at regional health hubs. Then, after the specialized training, deployment, building reactors, laying rail, stringing fiber, caring for communities. And this provides a lifelong career ladder. Crew member to journeyman to master to leadership. You could spend your whole life in the Corps, teaching the next generation, while building something to be proud of. That's the structure, but that's not the point. The point is what happens to the people in these corps. Think about a crew of 50 people training together for 12 weeks. They eat together, they sleep in the same barracks, they struggle through the same problems, they celebrate the same victories. Simply put, that's a third place, a bond between people, a shared identity. They can say, I'm building Indiana. Then they deploy. They work together for years on projects that actually matter. They build something real, something that will last longer than they will. That's mentorship. That's knowledge transfer. That's the succession crisis solved. Not by keeping kids on farms, but by giving them a new kind of inheritance. The pride of building something for their state. And when they're done for the day, they go back to the towns that are changing because of what they built. The high-speed rail station becomes a new Main Street. The health hubs become a place to gather. The fiber network connects them to people they haven't seen in years. The Corps doesn't just build infrastructure, it is infrastructure. Social infrastructure. The pipes for trust. And it doesn't just stop with the Corps members themselves. When a crew builds a rail line through a small town, that town gets a station. The station brings people. Those people need coffee. They need food. They need places to stay. New businesses open. Old storefronts fill. Suddenly, there's a reason to be on Main Street again. When a fiber line reaches a town stuck with dial-up, it brings connection, not just to the internet, but to each other. Kids can do homework, adults can work remotely, grandparents can video call grandkids who moved away. This is how you rebuild the pipes. Not with a single program, but with a system of programs that reinforce each other. The Corps builds the infrastructure rebuilds the towns rebuild the trust. To put it bluntly, no one is going to trust us with handling spent nuclear fuel if we can't even trust our own neighbors. The trust must come first, and it must be built together. Before we go further, I want to give you a story, a town that's already doing some of this.
Tucked in southern Indiana, Brown County is where nature meets artistry. In the early 1900s, painters like T.C. Steele made it famous, capturing rolling hills and golden forests on canvas. Today, it's still Indiana's fall crown jewel, with hiking, cabins, and the charming town of Nashville, full of galleries, music, and local flavor. Brown County isn't just a getaway, it's a living postcard.
So what did they do? They didn't wait for a savior. They just decided, together. They protected their town. They invested in public spaces. They created reasons to gather. Festivals, farmers markets, community diners. They kept money circulating locally. And here's what they prove. The wiring for connection still works. You just have to send a current through it. The Indiana Century Corps is how we send that current at scale across all 92 counties for at least the next 25 years. And the Corps is just one piece. Every part of the Indiana Century Project is designed to rebuild connection. High-speed rail, it's not just about speed, it's about reconnecting regions all across the state. A grandmother in rural Indiana can see her grandkids in Lafayette in 30 minutes and be home in time for dinner. The state becomes a neighborhood. Fiber optics? It's not just about bandwidth. It's about belonging. When you can video call your cousin in Evansville without buffering, when your small business can compete in distant markets, when your town isn't an information desert, then you are less alone. The health hubs I mentioned, it's not just about healthcare clinics. They are about human care. The nurse in the clinic in a van becomes a familiar face. She knows your name. She asks about your kids. She is a node of human connection. And what about the part of the resilience core that takes care of animals? It's not just about pets or wildlife. It's about people who care about the same things and the connections that they make. Every piece has a second job, rebuilding the conditions for trust. This episode is about loneliness, and our goal is to get to sovereignty. Here's the insight that ties it all together. You cannot have sovereignty without solidarity. You can't have solidarity without trust. You can't have trust without places to build it, and projects to build it through. The extraction economy depends on us being isolated. Alone, we are powerless. Alone, we accept things we'd never accept together. Alone, we scroll while our towns collapse. But together we are dangerous. Together, we notice things. Together, we ask questions. Together, we build things that cannot be taken away. That's sovereignty, not a document, not a political slogan. The simple, radical fact of people who know they can depend on each other. And that's what we are building. It's not just reactors and rail. It's the conditions for trust itself. Part 5. Repairing the circuit. Let's bring it home. The loneliness you feel, the quiet emptiness of a town that used to be something, the silence at the dinner table, the scroll through your phone when you're surrounded by people, that's not your fault. It's the human cost of the $5 billion annual extraction, the predictable output of a system designed to move goods, not to connect people. What happens when inequality poisons everything? The spirit level proves this isn't just in your head. It's actually in the data. Loneliness is structural. It was built by decisions over decades. That is why we must decide to build something better together. We don't cure loneliness with platitudes. We cure it by building new things together. A shared project so compelling, it pulls us out of the isolated despair and into common purpose. A project that says, you matter. Your neighbor matters. What we build together will outlast us. That project is the Indiana Century. Reactors and rail, yes, but also the crews that build them. The health hubs that care for us. The fiber that connects us. The co-ops that give farmers a stake in their own future. The host community fees that put money directly back into the very towns that were hollowed out by this extractive system. This is infrastructure for the soul. Before we go, I want you to do one thing this week. Call or visit a neighbor you haven't spoken to in more than a month. Just say hello. Ask how they're doing. Or visit your local library, not to check out a book, just to be there. Sit for 20 minutes. Watch people. Notice what it feels like to be in a public space with other humans. or attend a city council meeting. Sit in the back, listen, see who's trying to make things better. Feel the muscle of community. It is atrophied, but it is not dead. It just needs exercise. We will need it strong, because what we're building can't be built by lonely people. It has to be built by us together. Next week, we lay the philosophical foundation. Episode 4, Sovereignty, Not Subsidy. We introduce the 5 pillars. We answer the question, what does it look like to own our own future? If you've been waiting for the how, that's the episode. Share this episode with someone who needs to hear that they are not alone, that the loneliness they feel is not weakness. It is evidence. Evidence that something is broke, and evidence that it can be fixed. Question the old story, imagine the new one. We'll start building it together next week. And remember, sovereignty isn't given, it is built.